This week's hardware news recap looks at things like all of the various 1070 Ti's that have been pictured, Newegg getting sued, Wolfenstein 2, and its Vega support. Kind of an interesting story, although a brief one. And we've also got a new couple of products on the market to talk about. Cases, chairs, Seagate, financial results, things like that. And the big one, though, is the 1070 Ti overclocking story. Before getting to that, this content is brought to you by the Thermaltake Flow RGB closed-loop liquid cooler, which is a 360mm radiator plus 3 120 fans that are RGB illuminated. The Thermaltake Rain fans at that. This uses a 4.5 Gen Azetek pump, which is one of the faster pumps. You can learn more at the link in the description below. So at this point, several of the 1070 Ti cards have been pictured, or allegedly pictured anyway. And it really shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that they all look the same as the 1070s and the 1080s. It's the same card, more or less, just with some changes to the GPU. So the coolers are going to be the same. The product stack, for the most part, will kind of be the same, but it's getting shuffled around in a few ways. One of them is the naming. So you'll probably notice as the cards start getting their official names, either officially or unofficially posted online, you'll probably notice that anything that carries any type of pre-overclock moniker, anything that would be synonymous with a pre-overclock or could lead a consumer to believe that a card is pre-overclocked, those names will almost certainly be stripped from the titles of the 1070 Ti cards, as opposed to, for example, if you sold a 1070 card that was named 1070 Gaming OC. It's our understanding that the 1070 Ti's in that same instance would just be named 1070 Ti Gaming, no OC, and that is an NVIDIA mandate, we'll call it, from what we understand now. Now, there's always time for these things to change, but that's kind of what it sounds like is going on. As for why the monikers and the names are changing like that, it's obviously to reflect the overclocking changes. So from what we know today, it sounds like the 1070 Ti is not going to be permitted to be pre-overclocked by any of the AIB partners. We're not clear on if the consumers will be able to overclock the card. The story has been around for a little bit now. You've probably heard it. We haven't really spoken to it yet because we're just waiting on more information to come from direct sources in the industry, and we finally got it. And basically, what we do know is that the out-of-the-box clocks, not to be confused with out-of-the-box thermals, out-of-the-box clocks should be more or less set to whatever NVIDIA says they're set to, and then everything else is up to users. And it sounds like overclocking from a user standpoint will either require workaround software or potentially something like registry mods or vBIOS mods, things like that. We don't have any reason to believe that vBIOS or power play tables or workaround software would not work. So it's possible, or fairly possible, that you'll be able to overclock as a consumer. It might not be as simple as going to a normal application like Afterburner or Precision and doing it, but we'll see. We're going to look into it. There should be some leeway there. It's going to be a question of how difficult is it to do. Hopefully, it's not something like with Vega where the vBIOS gets locked down as well. I don't suspect that should happen, but we'll find out soon enough. As for the story, though, there have been plenty of 1070 Ti's pictured. EVGA's had plenty of theirs shown, I think, on video cards with a Z. And I think Asus has had some of theirs shown, and maybe a couple of others, but they all look the same, because they are. The coolers are the same. It's just going to come down to the GPU, which is basically going to be 1080s that failed validation or binned down 1080s to fill a certain market segment. We'll have more thoughts on that when the time comes, but as for now, these are all more or less either direct sources or rumors in the industry. But I think it's pretty safe to say at this point that based on everything that has been posted in the past week, the 1070 Ti is going to exist. It's just a question of what capacity will the overclocking exist in as well. Next story, though. Newegg getting sued. So Digital Trends reported on this a few days ago. The report stated that 4 South Korean banks have grouped up to file a lawsuit against Newegg, the U.S. California-based retailer, although they are owned by a Chinese parent organization now, the Hanzhou New Century Information Technology Company Limited, but still US-based. So they've been sued by a group of banks in South Korea who allege that the retailer worked with a South Korean hardware manufacturer to conspire about fraudulent orders for PC hardware. The banks accuse Newegg and ASI of collaborating with Manual, a company that solicited $3 billion in funding from South Korean banks, and one which the banks allege artificially inflated its prices for orders to Newegg and ASI by intentionally selling overpriced hardware to the companies. The CEO of Manual was sentenced previously to a now reduced 15-year prison term in 2013 for defaulting on billions of dollars in loans, and the banks are now chasing down Newegg and ASI for allegedly enabling this and working with the company on its fundraising. The lawsuit states, quote, "No such business would have bought the products at such an inflated price unless it intended to create the illusion of extensive, profitable, high-value commerce between it and its supplier for the purpose of defrauding lenders into supporting the transactions." And this was basically saying or suggesting that Newegg and ASI were getting kickbacks for enabling Manual's pricing or sales of hardware as they solicited loans from banks. So we'll see how that one goes out. This kind of thing pops up a lot, and either it goes nowhere or they settle, and we'll see if we hear about it again. But next news item, Wolfenstein 2. So Wolfenstein 2, the new Colossus, received official recommended and required specifications today, along with an interesting statement that pointed towards better Vega implementation in the game, which is using the Vulkan API. So Bethesda notes that its Vulkan integration will reportedly, quote, "utilize the power of AMD's Vega graphics chips in ways that were not possible before." And we're planning to benchmark this when it comes out. It's within a couple days from posting of this video. Vega's done fairly well with Doom, as have all the AMD video cards for the most part. So it makes sense to see similar performance hierarchies with this game, as it's also using Vulkan. It's just a question of how it's implemented. The bigger question is what is meant by Vega specifically being highlighted as being leveraged in ways we haven't seen before. So we'll look into that when the time comes, but that is the teaser that we have for now. As for the specs, Bethesda recommends an i7-4770 or FX 9370 or better for the CPU, and a GTX 1066 gigabyte or RX 474 gigabyte, pretty big disparity there for the GPU. And that disparity should, I mean, not that you can derive a lot from specs and recommendations, but should more or less point towards the difference that we'll see from Vulkan, but we'll see. As for minimums, it's an i7-3770 or FX 8350 with the GTX 770 or R9 290 for the GPUs. This next news item is a good opportunity to talk about clone cases and OEMs in the case industry. As many of you know, a lot of the industry is based on suppliers and OEMs and rebranding, and the manufacturers that we all know buy products that exist, theoretically improve them to some extent, and stick the brand on it, apply a warranty, apply some support, maybe some software, and then you have your product with all the extra bells and whistles and markup. That's kind of how it works. Well, the case side of things, you have companies like Jones Bow that create a product, sell it to companies like Rosewell and the one that made the Anades Crystal. Those are the companies that buy from people like Jones Bow, take an existing case in its entirety, brand it and sell it with a different fan count. So that's one side of it. Another side of it is reusing existing tooling. It's not uncommon, for example, for a company like Corsair to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars, upwards of $500,000 in some cases, to develop tooling for a complex, expensive flagship, what you would call a Halo product case, and then pull some of that R&D and tooling down into the product stack later on and try to recoup ROI on that investment. That's not abnormal for a business to do. And as long as it's done in a way that differentiates the product stack without making original purchasers feel like they should have just waited then all is fair and well, because you end up with a more diverse product arrangement and with complex, cool things that were expensive to make that wouldn't otherwise be brought to market at affordable prices. So that makes sense. What the sort of third side of it is you have tooling that is used by manufacturers for maybe an exclusivity window and eventually gets released and everyone starts using it. So we see this with, in the past, Asda's done this where they OEM cases for people like CyberPower or iBuyPower, and then later, maybe 6 months down the line, it gets released to consumers. Sharkoon's new case is the AM5 silent case, which AM5, really great name there, just trying to piggyback off of Ryzen, but AM5 silent case. So this one uses noise damping material and a colorized front panel. Here's why this case is pointless. If you've seen the Antec P8, which we reviewed, you will notice that its interior is identical to the Sharkoon AM5 silent case. Not only is the interior identical, the exterior is functionally identical. The ventilation and hole placement's in the same spot. All that's changed is the front panel coloration. So the ventilation's all going to be the same. Depending on what fans they use, the cooling performance should be roughly equivalent. And you look a little bit further, you've got the Silverstone RL05 from several years ago at CES. And that one is also the same. It's the same tooling. I think that's one of the older instances we could find of this tooling existing. And later came down to the P8, the Sharkoon TG5 also uses this with a different front panel, but it's got the same interior chassis, and we can show all of that. So that's the same as the AM5. And finally, this is also the same as the AeroCool Project 7C1. To be fair to AeroCool, theirs at least has a different front panel. It will have significantly different thermal results. It has different fans, has different LEDs. That's an example of a company taking a tooling that exists and building upon it to make it unique so that they can actually offer something new. But all these other ones, it's the same case, basically. But either way, they've got a new case on the market. Next up, Seagate Technologies reported financial results for the quarter ending September 29th, 2017. For its first quarter 2018, Seagate reported $2.6 billion in revenue with gross margin at 28% and net income at $181 million. Diluted earnings per share land at 62 cents. For reference, last year's financial results for quarter 1 2017 reported a $167 million net income and a 55-cent diluted earnings per share. The company's year-over-year revenue continues to decline in the face of flash popularity rising, though there's obviously still a place for hard drives. It's just becoming more limited. Seagate's first quarter 2018 cash flow was around $237 million from operations, with $350 million returned to shareholders in dividends and share repurchases. NZXT, in addition to the forthcoming H-Series cases, is rolling out a new Grid fan controller, and the Grid Plus version 3, as the name implies, is the company's third iteration of the digital fan controller. The new controller offers the ability to manage 6 different fans and can automatically detect the difference between 3-pin and 4-pin fans. Furthermore, the Grid Plus version 3 can monitor noise levels and adapt fan speed to performance or silence, or a mixture of both. It also offers a 0 dB mode for silent operation, and the controller meshes with NZXT's cam monitoring software in the new H-Series cases. NZXT also has its own gaming chair that's the same as every other gaming chair on the market. So that's pretty boring. But they're working with Vertigear for this one. It's the SL2000. It's rebranded in purple and black and says NZXT on it. And this is something that's kind of bothered me for the last 2 years. Going to all the trade shows, more and more people, just like 4 years ago, everyone started doing the mobile products. Those all died, fortunately. And a little bit after that, everyone started doing keyboards and mice. Some kept doing it because the margins are absurd compared to what they normally make, and some stopped. And over the last 2 years, everyone started making chairs. So Vertigear came into the market along with DX Racer and a couple of other more dedicated chair companies. And then you look at the chairs that are offered by Thermaltake, Corsair, NZXT, HyperX, and there's at least one more major manufacturer that does this too. But definitely Thermaltake NZXT, Corsair, HyperX, and a couple of the others we've seen at shows. You look at their chairs, they're all using the same supplier. For like the armrests are the same. They've got the same 4-point pivot. The base is the same. The wheels are the same except for the instance of Corsair, who use rollerblade wheels for theirs. And you end up with very minute differences, which kind of goes back to the case argument thing, where like if you're gonna use a supplier that's the same as your competitor, at least do something new and cool other than change the color. So NZXT is working with Vertigear to rebrand a chair, just like everyone else has worked with whomever Vertigear's supplier is, or Vertigear directly, to silently rebrand chairs and sell them as their own. At least NZXT owns that it's a Vertigear chair, though. We'll give them that. But yeah, they're all the same. Just get the one that's the cheapest if you really want one of those to begin with. I don't know. Stick with the Grid version 3 and the H series cases on NZXT. Next one, Cherry. So Cherry is targeting the DIY market now, and they're going after the hardcore keyboard or typist enthusiast. Cherry's got a new offering that allows buyers to purchase their switches loosely, either in developer kits or individually. And the switches being offered are MX Red, Blue, Black, Brown, Green, Clear, Silent Black, Silent Red, and the speed switches, which are those gray ones that Corsair has used. There's a small caveat here. Cherry only offers the switches without mounting pins through such retailers, and will exclusively sell the switches with a direct mount for the PCB. But either way, pretty cool if you're into that kind of thing and into the idea of building your own keyboard. And relatedly, Corsair is now offering its own keyboard keycap kits, and those are compatible with a wide range of the Corsair keyboards using Cherry brand switches. The new keycaps are PBT double shot meaning there are actually 2 molds. PBT is widely considered more durable than ABS, and the double shot process is intended to help resist fading and illegibility over time, which is a common complaint with the etched keycaps. Corsair is offering the keycaps in both black and white with a 2-year warranty, and they should cost $50 for a keycap kit. That's all for this week's hardware news. As always, you can subscribe for more. Go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly, or just go to the store.gamersnexus.net. We've fixed the IPv6 cert issue that some of you told us about, so thank you for that. But definitely subscribe for more, because you're going to want to see the next time I complain about all the copies in the industry. I'll see you all next time. Land at 62 cents. For reference, last year's financial resorts